The White House Correspondents' dinner was last night.
What a banger.
Snubbed again. Russell has his press pass now. Still, nothing.
No,
nothing.
Not even a postcard. Not even a wish you were here.
Not even a wish you were here. Exactly. You'd think we'd be on the backup list if somebody didn't show up. No, not at all.
Well, not that any of these mercenary scumbags didn't show up in spite of the pleas of Gaza journalists that they not show up. Did anyone actually not show up? Like, did a single journalist take them up on that?
Yeah, did anyone boycott this event? Chants of shame on you greet guests at White House Correspondents' dinner, shadowed by war in Gaza. The AP reports the war in Gaza spurred large protests outside a glitzy roast with President Joe Biden, journalists, politicians, and celebrities Saturday, but went all but unmentioned by participants inside, with Biden instead using the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner to make both jokes and grim warnings about Republican rival Donald Trump's fight to reclaim the U.S. presidency. Trump boycotted this event, and there was a lot of fretting. Not this event, meaning last night, but when he was in office, he didn't go to these. And there's been a lot of fretting about this. Well, you see how he just sticks his thumb in the eye of Democratic norms by not attending the White House Correspondents' Dinner. No, that's actually a tribute to Democratic norms. Like, the norm in a healthy democracy is for the press and the president to have a hostile relationship. That's actually a healthy Democratic norm. This is the opposite. This incestuous, I pat my back, you pat yours, that's not a healthy relationship between the government and the press.
Of course not.
So you see how completely upside down it is.
If the relationship were actually adversarial the rest of the year, having this topsy-turvy day, yeah, fine. But it isn't.
Right.
It isn't. They're all buddies. If you watch the White House Correspondents' Dinner, that's a lot of the humor, how chummy we all are.
Right.
How much we all like each other. We're all it's like a high school dance. It has the vibe of a high school dance. You're celebrating these popular kids in school.
Exactly. And how do you get invited? You stay in good standing, right? Otherwise, you don't get invited.
Yep.
An evening normally devoted to presidents, journalists, and comedians taking outrageous pokes at political scandals and each other often seemed this year to illustrate the difficulty of putting aside the coming presidential election and the troubles in the Middle East and elsewhere. To get inside Saturday's dinner, some guests had to hurry through hundreds of protesters outraged over the mounting humanitarian disaster for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. They condemned Biden for his support of Israel's military campaign and Western news outlets for what they said was undercoverage and misrepresentation of the conflict. Shame on you, protesters draped in the traditional Palestinian keffiyeh cloth shouted, running after men in tuxedos and suits and women in long dresses holding clutch purses as guests hurried inside for the dinner. Western media, we see you and all the horrors that you hide, crowds chanted at one point. Other protesters lay sprawled motionless on the pavement next to mock-ups of flak vests with press insignia representing the over 100 journalists who have been killed in Gaza over the past almost 7 months now. Ralliers cried, "Free, free Palestine." They cheered at one point someone inside the Washington Hilton, where the dinner had been held for decades, unfurled a Palestinian flag from a top-floor hotel window. We'll show you guys this in a minute. Protest organizers said they aim to bring attention to the high numbers of Palestinian and other Arab journalists killed by Israel's military since the war began in October. More than 24 journalists in Gaza wrote a letter last week calling on their colleagues in Washington to boycott the dinner altogether. The toll exacted on us for merely fulfilling our journalistic duties is staggering, the letter said. We are subjected to detentions, interrogations, and torture by the Israeli military, all for the crime of journalistic integrity. One organizer complained that the White House Correspondents Association, which represents the hundreds of journalists who cover the president, largely has been silent since the first weeks of the war about the killings of Palestinian journalists. White House Correspondents Association did not respond to a request for comment, so here are some tweets here. Shame on you. Shame on you. Wild scene outside of White House Correspondents' Dinner as Free Palestine protesters hold U.S. corporate media complicit in genocide. Let's take a look at this video here. So there are the people playing dead there. And then, if we take a look back to our slideshow here, next tweet here, breaking, massive Palestinian solidarity demonstration gathers at the entrance of the White House Correspondents' dinner, confronting high-profile guests as they arrive. There's the Palestinian flag unfurled from one of the rooms of the hotel. The dinner itself is, I guess, held in the ballroom or conference room of the hotel. So there's the Palestinian flag that was mentioned, and then here is a close-up of the journalists in good standing making their way through the crowd of protesters.
They don't care. They don't care.
No, they got an invite to the ball.
They don't care.
They got the invite to the ball. That's all they care about. That and that alone. Now, that article mentioned that Gaza journalists wrote a letter.
It is said that the people are revolting.
Who said it? They stink on ice.
This is a Medium post signed by many different journalists in Gaza. Boycott the White House Correspondents' dinner and stand with your colleagues in Gaza. We're not going to read the whole thing. We'll read the last part of it, which I think is probably the best, although this whole thing is worth reading. It's on Medium. It's all over social media if you want to read it. The White House Correspondents' dinner is an embodiment of media manipulation, trading journalistic ethics for access. Wow. You know, it's funny because I thought Gaza is not a free society. I thought you go to Gaza and you say the wrong thing and they throw you off the roof. Why then do the Gaza
play with
journalists...
your head like a soccer ball.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So if this is such a backwards civilization, why is it that the Gaza journalists, in one sentence there, prove they have a better understanding of the function of a free press than the douchebags walking into the ballroom? Like, they seem to understand. It's an embodiment of media manipulation, trading ethics for access. It's access journalism and media manipulation. Why do the people from the so-called third world, the so-called backwards society of Gaza, they understand that? They seem to understand our Constitution better than those journalists in line do. Because if you believe in a free press, you believe that a healthy democratic society requires accountability for elected officials. Who is best equipped to hold them accountable? The press. So rather than get dressed up and dolled up and go wine and dine them and, you know, make chummy jokes about each other all night. Like I said, it'd be one thing if you did that and the rest of the year you went at them. And this was like ceremony. But the way a lot of these journalists conduct themselves all year.
Topsy-turvy ritual.
Right, exactly. But the way these journalists conduct themselves all year, it's as if they're auditioning for a spot, as if they're making sure they don't lose their invitation to this thing, right?
Right.
For journalists to
although very much now, this occupies the place on Washington's social calendar in a lot of respects that the Academy Awards do in Hollywood.
Oh, exactly.
And there's definitely a parallel in how both of them have lost their luster for the public. Because there was a time when people liked this ritual. They thought it was adorable, kind of, right? Oh, look at them poking fun at Scalia. And, it was this very West Wing ideal, the White House Correspondents' dinner. The different, you're conservative and I'm liberal, but we can joke around and have a good time. And the public, a certain portion of the public, much more than now, ate it up. This mix of celebrities and politicians and journalism and media figures. It was very much like a royal event. It was all at its height before Michelle Wolf took it down, which we'll get into. It really became almost the pinnacle social event of the entire culture. You'd have Harvey Weinstein in Happier Times, right? You had this representation of Hollywood. You'd have famous actors would go there, like when it really hit its peak. And now I think most people are disgusted by it. Just like the Academy Awards. I mean, most people don't take that seriously in the way they once did and find it distasteful in a way they never did before.
Yeah, no, indeed. For journalists to fraternize at an event with President Biden and Vice President Harris would be to normalize, sanitize, and whitewash the administration's role in genocide. The press plays an integral role in standing up against injustice by illuminating the truth and holding power to account. Journalists in Gaza cannot continue to bear the burden of doing so alone. Yes, as journalists reporting from the belly of the beast, you have a unique responsibility to speak truth to power and uphold journalistic integrity. It is unacceptable to stay silent out of fear or professional concern while journalists in Gaza continue to be detained, tortured, and killed for doing our jobs. We have witnessed how journalists across the U.S. have demanded justice for fellow journalists like Jamal Khashoggi, Shireen Abu Akleh, and Evan Gershkovich. It is past time journalists take action for journalists in Gaza. We call on all journalists of conscience to stand with us and uplift our call to boycott the White House Correspondents' dinner. You can learn the name and stories of some of the Palestinian journalists killed through the Committee to Protect Journalists. Here are the signatories to the letter. More also signed on that were not listed on Medium for some reason. Maybe they didn't want their names printed on the internet. But this is a list of endorsees of the letter itself. And as Russell pointed out earlier, I don't know of one person who actually heeded that call and
Not
boycotted. Maybe one. Some did that we don't know about, but they certainly didn't make a public showing of it. And you would think if they were going to boycott it, they would make a public showing of it, since that would kind of be the point.
Right. I think nobody who would get invited to this would give a shit about Gazans being slaughtered. If you don't already have your mind right, you're not getting an invitation to that gig.
Yeah, like how do you get dolled up and go there and sit there and listen to jokes from the president who's funding a genocide? Like how do you like anybody who's capable of like setting that aside and having a fun evening? They're not going to be the kind of person who would boycott if they got an invitation, right?
Well, it's very much a decadent elite partying. And at one time, I think that's really what changed. It's the same thing that changed with the Academy Awards. We used to see them as our elites. And now we see them as a removed and remote elite class, completely not only disconnected from the public, but completely at odds with the public needs, will, and well-being.
Please clap.